Looks like our participants are starting to pile in.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Sorry, we're a little bit, just a couple minutes late here getting started, but we're so glad you're here with us. We are going to go ahead and kick things off for the sake of time. Welcome to our first support seminar for the Generation 28 Open Enrollment Charter application. Remember, these are just optional webinars, basically, that we're offering throughout the sort of application window. My name is Natalie Elliott. I'm a new schools coordinator, and I'd like to introduce my colleague, John.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you all again.
Yes, you may recognize our faces from the info sessions. And I'm just going to start with a couple of quick housekeeping reminders before we get into the content of today's session. So just remember that if you have a colleague or an applicant team member who wasn't able to attend today, this session is being recorded and it will be put on the Additional Supports website with the other recordings for the info sessions, and all support seminars will be located there, all the recordings. Additionally, go back there and register for next week's topic. We will be previewing some agency supports and initiatives, additional things that are offered throughout TEA's mini programs. And today we're going to be using the Q&A function. So if you have questions, don't raise your hand or don't try to chat us. The chat's been disabled. You're just going to put things into the Q&A, which we'll monitor throughout. And then after each presentation, we'll provide a few minutes of open Q&A where the presenter will be able to engage with your questions directly and answer them in live time. If there is anything that we can't get to because we either don't have the capacity to answer it at this moment, we don't want to mislead you or give you the wrong information, or if we just run out of time, we will try to address all of the questions that we possibly can in a forthcoming FAQ document. Okay. Another thing I just want to go ahead and flag before we get started is some of you have seen, if you are subscribers to our newsletter and application updates, that we are offering a third info session this Friday, the 12th. So if you have any colleagues or connections who were also hoping to apply for a charter this year, but missed the other two opportunities, there is a third opportunity this Friday. So please get the word out and let them know. All right, we have two very knowledgeable presenters today. We're going to go ahead and start with a real live new charter school superintendent who has been in your position not so long ago, Ms. Ambika Dani. And she is going to share about community engagement strategies. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to her. Ambika.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you everyone for having me here today. I was a Generation 23 applicant, so about 5 years ago now, and had the pleasure of working with John and Bruce back then. And I'm excited to be able to present more about community engagement today. It is a core part of the work, especially the pre-work and post-work once you receive your charter. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. Perfect. Can we all see that? Beautiful. Here we go. So community engagement while founding a school. This was our charter. I just wanted to share a picture. This was the night before the charter was due. This was the 5 copies of the charter that I had to submit to John Garland. And I remember the moment I drove up to Austin with this massive box and just said, here you go, John. It was a beautiful moment. There was a lot of work leading up to that, and then so much more after that point. But the journey is challenging, yet the most rewarding journey that we've been on and continue to be on. So I'm really excited to be sharing, part of it with all of you who are looking to start your new charters. As I thought about community engagement, I reflected back to what this looked like in the year before founding a charter and thought about 4 different areas that I felt like we were engaging the community. One of them were future families that we hoped would come to our school community. And by that, I mean the actual physical neighborhood that we were a part of, the city of San Antonio as a whole and elected officials, and then the board, because the board was an incredibly important part of this journey. This is just one of our many, many table setups over the course of pre-charter. So I wanted to start with future families and how we engage them. And these are actually pictures of our families that joined us 2 years before we opened up the school. There were a lot of things that we did to engage families that were interested in the vision. I think one of the best things that you can do early on is have a presence online, have a website, even if that is a quick square website or something that you can build on your own, just so that when families hear about you and they're interested in learning more, they have a way of contacting you and following up. And one of the things that we did early on was we put a lead form on our website so that if a family was interested in learning more, we got that communication right away and we were able to follow up with them. I was oftentimes the first point of contact they had. I would pick up the phone a minute after they submitted a form, even if we didn't have a school yet, introduce myself and tell them more about the school. And for some of our families who are still here today, that is the moment they remember. They remember that initial conversation, and it was because of that that they finally enrolled their child in our school. We started a family advisory council, or the equivalent of a PTO, a year before the school started. So even before we started our school, we found a core set of founding families who were interested in being a part of the visioning with us. And those founding families then became some of the greatest spokespersons for our school. So I can't recommend that highly enough, because we really saw the value in having those founding families engage in the visioning and missioning process with us. We did an incredible amount of block walking in our community to meet new families face to face. We would go apartment to apartment complex in our community. The board, myself, we all split up to be able to find families, share more about the school with them. And then we did any single community event that we saw in the community. I was there tabling, usually around the holidays, around October and December. You see a lot more community events pop up. So that was another way to connect with new families. And then we did create social media groups. So again, another way to engage new families before you have a physical building is to create for us, a Promessa Academy Founding Families group. And it was a great way to stay in touch with them as we work through the process of founding our building. I put this first because I really think that engaging future families is probably the core of the community engagement work, and everything else I'm going to go into supplemented that. But without students, you can't open, you don't have your funding. And it's incredibly important that you have families that are excited and that, are supporters for you leading up to submitting the charter and then going into day one of school. And then as I thought about the second piece of this, how did we engage our neighborhood community? How did we develop a presence in the west side of San Antonio and make sure that nonprofits knew about us, that we understood the needs of the community? There were a whole host of things that we did leading up to that moment as well. Again, we were part of every single community event, but actually hosted some of our own. So the picture that you see here is a little book drive, and it was right in front of our facility. And the moment we had a facility, we started to do events in front of it to bring awareness to who we were. This was during COVID, and we were able to purchase a lot of books that were free, at very low cost, and put it out on Facebook and boosted the event and said, come stop by our future school and come get a free book. It was one of our most successful events, and really would encourage you to think about the timing of the event and the need. For us, we saw that COVID, everyone felt really secluded, and this opportunity to drive by and be able to pick up a book was a safe way to also have an interaction with us. So that worked out really beautifully for us. I did visit almost every nonprofit in our community. There are over 50 of them, but I found it incredibly valuable to learn from the services that they provided, to meet families that access those nonprofits, and then also to share more about us. And it's created, now 3 to 5 years of a relationship with nonprofits in our community that have supported us and that we're able to support them. Local libraries were a great place to meet new families. They're just a natural place where families come to. And then I also reached out to local leaders in the community. So as I would go around and talk to nonprofits, I would ask them, who are the people in the West Side that I need to talk to? Who are the leaders? Who are the champions of the West Side? And I would try to set up meetings with them to share more about the school, to gain their trust, and then also to hear more about what they think the community needed and how we could provide that. And then city and elected officials, there is a component of this that is political. We are going up against the state board. We do have to get approvals from the city when it comes to permitting and being able to build your facility. And starting this relationship earlier on, before you need approvals, before you need support, is incredibly helpful to get your charter school off the ground and get the kind of support that you need. I would look up every single education related event in San Antonio. There are many of of them, as I'm sure there are many in the cities that all of you are coming from. And I would go and attend them in the year and two leading up to the actual charter submission. At every single one of those events, you would find at least one city or state official. And it was incredible to be able to find those connection points, to be able to meet them in person. And you could see that after a couple events, they would recognize you, and they would come up to you and, you know, be excited about the progress of your school. For some officials, it was hard to meet them. And so I would call them, I would email them, I would do everything I could to get in touch with someone in their office to be able to start a conversation. The chamber meetings are always a really wonderful place to start to connect with both business officials and city officials. So in San Antonio, the Hispanic Chamber has a huge presence, and so does the West Side Chamber in our community. And attending those events allowed me to connect with more city and state officials. And then there are just other networking events that prior to starting this work, I used to be a teacher and really never connected to the cities that I lived in this way. But as I started the work of founding a charter, as you would attend one event, you would find out about so many more. And every single one of these events to me was an opportunity to gain support from the school, to learn more about the state of education in San Antonio, and then also to build your board, which is really the final piece here when it came to community engagement was building a board. This is a picture of my founding board early on in the process. And I'll highlight LinkedIn as one of the greatest sources of finding a board. I still remember that after our the interview with the TEA, John Garland had come up to me, and so did a couple other of the TEA officials, and said, wow, that was a great board. And it really was. And I'm proud of the way that we found them, because I moved to San Antonio not knowing many people. I knew 2 people in this city and started the work of founding a charter soon after that. And one of the things I had to do right off the bat was start a board. And I was incredibly nervous about this idea of getting, 6 to 9 people to rally with me on this huge initiative when I didn't have relationships with them. So one of the things that I did was I did a significant amount of LinkedIn research on people that had the skill sets that I needed for a board, who also had other things like volunteer opportunities or board experience. So I felt like they could be a good fit. I would send them emails on LinkedIn saying, this is who I am. This is, I'm trying to start a charter school on the West Side. This is why. Are you interested in meeting? Are you interested in a coffee? I probably sent out thousands of LinkedIn messages over the course of less than a month, to the extent that I was blocked off of LinkedIn for a while until they realized that I was doing good work. But in the thousands of messages I sent out, about 5 to 10% of those people would respond, and a smaller percent of those would actually be open to a meeting. And most of those people that responded to those messages are people that are on my board today. So I can't recommend highly enough just putting yourself out there and reaching out to the community, especially in a city like San Antonio that's incredibly friendly and committed to giving back to the city, and just trying to reach people that you think could be interested in supporting you in this work. Another great source of finding people who could be on the board were things like the 40 under 40 list or 30 under 30. In San Antonio, we have a lot of leadership programs. And so I would look at alumni from those programs and try to connect either with program leadership to connect me with alumni, or go on back to LinkedIn, my favorite source, and connect with those people who are alumni of leadership programs. And then someone gave me this advice, and I took it, and it was well worth it. For every single one of those meetings I had with someone, I would end the meeting with very grateful thank you. And then, who else can I talk to? Who else would be interested in this work, either from a board perspective, or who can I learn from? And I would say that 90% of the people that I met with were willing to give me 2 or 3 names of people that I could connect with. And as a result, from knowing 2 people in San Antonio today, I probably know hundreds or thousands of people. And it's just been a result of people connecting me and helping build my network to be able to support this school and bring it to life. And then finally, when it came to building the board, I would look up local businesses that supported their employees to volunteer. So in San Antonio, big organizations like Rackspace and USAA, they really support and encourage their employees to engage in volunteer opportunities. And I found that when businesses already had that philosophy, it was oftentimes easier for people to have the time to engage fully in boards. So those are just some of the ways that I engaged and built the board. And I actually have a little picture here of two of the people that were on my board. One of them still is and has been from the beginning. And these were the initial responses to my cold call email of, would you like to learn more? And these are the kind of people that you can find if you're willing to put yourself out there and say, this is the work I want to do and this is why. I have some final pictures here just of ways that we did engage the community. Here's another picture, the first one of us doing a puppy parade early on. This was a couple months before school started, but we actually did home visits for many of our families, both to share more about who we were as a school, for them to see our teachers, and also for our teachers to learn about the community that they were about to teach. We did some pilots with students leading up to the start of our school year. So the summer before we opened, a year before we opened that summer, we did a pilot, which was actually a math camp that I led. And part of that was to be able to share our vision with families in the community, because we do a lot of talking about our vision, but actually showing them, bringing it to life can be so powerful. So we did a couple pilots leading up to the start of the school year. And this is probably one of my favorite pictures, but this is our site back in the background before we opened up. And here's one of our families actually volunteering to take baskets of food to families. So we used to do a lot of food drives, and we would go deliver them to our founding families who during COVID really required food and needed food. And we had other families from our founding family group volunteer to help us with that work. And it just created a really strong community even before we founded our school. So those are just some of the many ways I think we engaged families, and I hope that was helpful. My contact information is here. If anyone has more questions or wants templates of things we did, we're happy to share. But hopefully that was helpful. I know that was a quick overview, and happy to answer any questions that people have as well.
That was wonderful, Ambika. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. We have plenty of time for questions, folks. If you want to ask about community engagement strategies, the channel is open, so to speak.
While we wait, Ambika, I'm just going to go ahead and jump out with a question that I'm sure
Yeah.
some of these people have. They just don't want to ask it, so I'm going to ask it. What would be, in your mind, your first step, right? Of all those steps, would it be to, like, what would be step one for you in terms of community engagement? Because, you provided a lot of information. And where would you start? First thing.
I started with my board, and I think part of that was the timing. If everyone is on this call is part of Generation 28 and doesn't have a board yet, we're still building the board. I think that is one of the most important things to do. And these all are so interconnected to where I feel like once you find a board, you also find potential future families, or you find people who know of families looking for other schools, to where it lends itself to that. But I think the importance of a strong board can't be understated, and is one of the reasons why we're in this place going into year 3 incredibly strong today.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. The enrollment we started with was 200 students, which we're really proud of. We were aiming for about 250, and we also were faced with the pandemic. So I think at the time, especially in a state like Texas, where kindergarten is optional, that really lessened our kinder numbers to an extent we weren't anticipating. But we started off strong, and we were able to amend our budget to work with our 200. And just looking at historical charters, 200 was a really strong number to start off in with year 1. So we were incredibly proud of that. Staffing in the initial stages, of course. As soon as we received the charter, that was the moment where I first brought on other staff. Up to that point, it was just myself and the board. Once you do receive your charter, you are starting to get eligible for the charter school. The CSP grant, if you apply for that and are able to access that, that was one of the ways that we could fund staff in that founding year. And then we were also able to secure other startup grants. My first 2 hires that are my first one is our director of operations, who actually is sitting quietly in the background there as I do our this webinar. She was one of the best hires I've made to date, and I think part of having someone like that on your team is that there's so many systems and structures that you have to build as a new school. And without that foundation, teachers aren't supported and your school can't run well. So she was one of the first people I hired. And then the next person I hired was essentially like an assistant principal of instruction or director of curriculum and instruction. And after those two hires, we worked on hiring our founding staff. One of the things that we did with our founding staff was we engaged them early. So I hired as early as October and November before we opened our school. And I was able to find stipends in my budget to engage them in work. So we had 6 to 8 months of working with people before day one started, to where a lot of the attrition you might see with new schools with staff not showing up day one or accepting other contracts just didn't happen with us, because we had these really strong relationships with teachers even before we opened up our school. The facility, I feel like it's another webinar altogether, but I'll do a quick facility answer because I do think we have some time. Our facility did not exist. We did try to find a facility in existence. It was incredibly hard in our community. I will give you some advice that I think was the best thing that I did in our facility search that no one told me to do, but it was out of desperation. We worked with a lot of realtors leading up to finding our site, and I felt like in the inner city west side, you have to be incredibly creative with the sites that you find. It's very heavy residential and industrial, and it was hard to find a 4-acre plus site. I think one day, out of frustration of not finding anything, I pulled up Bear County's database of all of the plots of land you can actually find in our zip code. And I clicked on every single plot of land that was 4 acres or more. And I knew a lot of those plots of land because I'd driven around the community, but I actually found an 8-acre plot of land, and I drove by that site and I said, interesting, there's absolutely nothing on this plot of land. I wonder why no one has brought it to my attention. I found the owner's information, picked up the phone, called them, and it started this 8-month conversation about how can we build a school on your land, which is the land that we are on today. So when it comes to the facility, I mean, you cannot be creative enough, you cannot persevere enough, because it is, I mean, it's going to make or break your school. It is one of the hardest things to do from the moment you get your charter. You should probably be working on it from now as well. And we did have a couple sites in mind before we even got our charter approved, but it is hard for people to take you seriously when you don't have a charter approved. So I would really take ownership on the facility in any way that you can. And then I'm sure TEA, and I'm happy to connect you with people who are able to help us build the site and make it affordable for us as a new charter school. Those were great questions. All questions I think I was thinking about when we were in this stage, and many, many more that continue to come to mind. So if I can be a resource for anyone here, feel free to take my contact information and reach out. We're happy to help and share in any way that we can, because this is a very challenging process. And I gained so much knowledge and insight and assistance from other people who had been through this journey before, and want to be able to give that back to anyone else in any way that we can. That may be it for questions, I think.
We can do a last call for questions. And I'm sorry if you had some parting words or.
No, I was just going to say good luck to everyone. Again, it's challenging, but so rewarding. And being able to see our school come to life and serve the kiddos that we do is just the greatest joy that I have. So I'm here as a resource. John has my contact information as well. And I wish you all the best of luck as you get ready to submit applications to start your own charters. We have Meet the Teacher Night in 5 minutes. So I'm about to jump off to be able to welcome new families and returning families, but thank you all for letting me be here today, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you so much for donating some of your precious time. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, and relatedly, we are now going to go to our portfolio manager here in the Charter Division at TEA, Dr. Bruce Marchand, to talk about governance best practices. So just as you heard Ambika share about the value of recruiting a strong board, we're going to continue with board responsibilities and speak more to that topic. Bruce, you ready?
I am ready. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, John. Let me go ahead and get our presentation ready to share here. And there we go. Hopefully everybody see the screen here. Give me a thumbs up if you do, Natalie, John.
Yep,
Good.
looks great.
Okay, super duper. All right. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for taking some time today to visit and hopefully learn some great things about getting a charter school started, and especially in the realms of governance and board support. And it's hard to actually follow a fantastic presentation like Ambika's, but I'll do my best. But I want to talk a little bit about, you can see the title, Governing for Success, Tips for Building an Effective Board. So as a reminder, when you endeavor to open your open enrollment charter school, and as you apply, board selection, as Ambika so eloquently stated, is fundamental. And a good board will help your school soar. A poorly chosen board, folks that are not strong board members are really gonna be, I guess, kind of like an anchor, that not an anchor in a good way. They're gonna pull you down to the bottom and sink your school. I hate to be using such a blunt metaphor, but it's really, really important to make good choices in regards to board members. So I don't want to talk so much in regards to what Ambika talked about. What I want to talk about is really selecting in terms of board member characteristics. So these are things that board members are going to do, and things that you want board members to really possess in regards to their strengths and abilities to help you have a fantastic school. So we're going to talk about board member selection itself. We're going to talk about personal integrity and the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, the diversity advantage when building a board, other important board member characteristics, and then a few additional resources that we'll mention. And then, of course, as Natalie and John mentioned, we'll have some time for questions at the end. So the first thing I want to do is just talk generally about board member selection. And what I want to do is talk about what board members do. What is their role? What do board members really put forth in regards to their duties to help your school succeed? So first of all, board members help to promote and actually develop, close my box here, develop, promote, and evaluate the mission and vision of the school. So the mission and vision is the key. What's your school about? And board members help develop that, promote it, and evaluate it. So they do that by clearly communicating the school's visions, goals, and direction to students, staff, parents, and the community. Board members should own that vision. They should own that mission. They are really the folks that embody what your school is all about. And if your board members aren't bought in, if they don't really value or support or understand the mission of the school or the vision of the school, that's a real problem, because board members are going to use then that embodiment of the mission and vision to help make great decisions for your school to be successful. And we're going to talk about those in regards to what it is they do. So first of all, they're going to clearly communicate that mission and vision, and then they're going to ensure that programs and activities of the school are aligned with the mission and vision. All right, so you've got that STEM school that you're thinking about starting. So you're thinking about technology, and you're thinking about things that have to do with different science courses that you're going to teach, and different technology that you're going to bring into the school, and some things that have to do with perhaps career and technology and all that. And then maybe you have a board member that's, well, I'm not really interested so much in that. I just feel like poetry and understanding how poetry just guides the lives of all of our students. That's the most important thing for me. Well, again, I'm using kind of a silly example, but if that's the case, that board member is not aligned with your mission and vision. And that could be a personal belief, and it might be a great personal belief, but that's not a belief that's going to help promote the mission and vision of your school. So I would suggest that you make sure that your board members are bought in to that mission and vision. Then board members hold themselves responsible for the overall performance of the school. So by the way, with the state of Texas, with authorizers, we certainly rely on superintendents. We rely on that chief administrative officer, whatever you want to call that person, the CEO, the superintendent, the head of the school, the headmaster, whoever that person is. At TEA, we really rely on that person to help us understand and help us as we authorize, and they're the chief communicators with us almost always. However, who is ultimately responsible for the operation of the school? It's the board. The board are the folks that are responsible for the operation of the school. The superintendent certainly will take the directives of the board, the goals, everything else, and put those things into place. But boards have a responsibility to make sure that superintendent is doing what they're supposed to do. And if that superintendent's not doing what they're supposed to do, then the board needs to provide directives to the superintendent or find another superintendent. So again, board members are responsible for that overall performance of the school. So how do they do that? They set goals for academic, financial, and operational performance. They hire a great school leader to implement those goals. And again, that's a big responsibility of the board, is to hire a chief administrative officer, superintendent, again, whatever you call that person, the person that's going to be that administrator that's going to put those goals, put all those performance objectives into action. They also establish goal progress measures and a process to evaluate progress on a periodic basis. And finally, the board provides resources to assist in the completion of those goals. That board is ultimately going to approve the budget. They're going to approve the audit of the budget, and they're going to make sure, hopefully, that resources are available so that the school has all the tools it needs, and the superintendent has all the tools he or she needs to make sure that the goals and objectives of the school can be accomplished. And then board members hire the school leader and hold that leader accountable. So again, we're going to kind of dig into what the school leader does and how the board supports that. So the board is going to make sure and provide those resources, as I mentioned, to assure the efficient and effective operation of the school. They're going to allow the leader to manage those resources to accomplish the performance goals of the school. So again, boards are responsible for oversight. They're looking at that dashboard of data. They're making sure that goals and objectives are being monitored and accomplished. But they're not in there every day. They're not micromanaging the school. They've hired a competent superintendent to do that. So they're going to allow the leader to manage those resources and to effectively run the school. And finally, they're going to hold the leader accountable to ensure that the mission and vision are implemented successfully as measured by the performance goals. So again, we dug into a little bit to what the superintendent does and how the board supports and holds that superintendent accountable. And then board members seek input and advice. So what do effective board members do? Well, they listen to students, they listen to parents, they listen to staff, they listen to the community at large, and then they act on those concerns by establishing committees to advise the board so that all the decisions that the board makes are based on really good information. And then they seek feedback through other processes such as surveys, open forums, anything that the board wants to do to really get a feel, a pulse on what's going on in the school. So again, board members are good listeners. Certainly they're good directors in a way in regards to helping to direct the mission and vision of the school and the goals and objectives that'll essentially allow you to figure out if the mission and vision of the school are being accomplished. But they listen, they ask questions, they really look to staff and parents and community to make sure that things are happening. And if they get some information that says that maybe good things aren't happening with academic performance or maybe some things that are not so quantitative, maybe qualitative things like, well, there just seems to be, some issues with staff morale, or there seems to be some issues with student discipline and holding students accountable for their behavior. Maybe there's other issues. So board members are going to listen to that they're certainly going to work through the superintendent to make sure that those things are being accomplished. But again, they're good listeners, they ask questions. So some things to think about, and these are things that I just put in the slide deck, but these are what we want board members to think about. So as you think about selecting your board, these are things that you would want a board member, as they are on the board and as they serve, to be able to answer. You know, what are the ways that I as a board member promote the mission and vision of the school? And then how does the board do that as a whole? As a board, as the board set performance expectations for the school, does the board know what those metrics are? Do individual members know what those metrics are? Are they measurable? How often do we review progress on performance expectations? And then, is the superintendent's evaluation linked to our performance expectation? What other performance measures are in place for our superintendent? And finally, as a board, do we have systems in place to get feedback from key stakeholders, including parents, staff, community members, and students? So again, these are just things that good board members and effective boards do. So these are things to think about as you are looking for folks to help promote that mission and vision of your school and help you get things started, and then help you along the way once you get your charter approved. All right, let's talk about some personal characteristics of board members. And this is really important because, as Ambika mentioned, and I thought it was so interesting, such a great way to really go through and look in a very broad fashion for board members, and then kind of narrow things down until you've gotten where you've got that right person on the board. So one of the things that you'll want to do in your board selection, and one of the things that we require of board members across our charter portfolio, is to possess these personal qualities of care, loyalty, and obedience. So let's talk about what those are. So the duty of care is essentially requiring that board members be reasonably aware of what is occurring at the school so that they can make informed decisions. So what is a board member that essentially possesses the duty of care? What do they look like? Well, they look like that board member that takes that binder home with all the board agenda items and studies it and is ready to ask questions. There are board members that show up on time for meetings. There are board members that are involved with the charter community, with staff and with parents, and they're asking questions. They show up at events at your school. They're visible, and that's what you want. And so the duty of care literally means they care about their job. They care about their job as a board member. So again, they're actively involved. They are ready to make good decisions based on their information and information that they've studied and that they've researched and that they've asked questions about. And that really, that informed judgment that they possess is really going to help your school move forward. So again, great board members possess the duty of care. Great board members are loyal. They possess the duty of loyalty. So essentially that's putting the best interests of the school, of kids, above any personal or professional interests. So unfortunately, sometimes there's two types of board members. There's board members that are looking for a personal advantage or a gain or something that they're going to get out of their service to the board. And then there's the selfless board members. Really, I like to call them servant board members. And they're the ones that are there because they're there to serve kids, and they're there to serve the community, and they're there to serve the parents that are trusting their children to the school. So those board members, they don't serve on the board for financial or personal gain, and they're free from conflicts of interest. So what's a conflict of interest? Well, think about some examples. Well, let's see, we need to, get this contract for a copy machine for the front office. Oh, one board member says, wow, my brother owns this company that sells copy machines or leases copy machines, and you can get a great deal and all that. That's a conflict of interest, okay? There is there may be an actual conflict of interest, it may just be a perceived conflict of interest. regardless, those are the kind of situations you absolutely don't want to get involved with, that you want to avoid. That's a simplistic example, but there's all sorts of ways where board members can potentially have conflicts of interest in regards to things that the board is involved in. Many times it has to do with the resources of the school. So some are inevitable, and board members that have the duty of loyalty will immediately recuse themselves. They'll step away. They'll say, you know what, I can't be involved in this discussion because I would have a conflict of interest in this. And so that's what you want. So certainly there's going to be potential conflicts of interest, but you want board members that are willing to step away and make sure they're not involved in that. So again, they're loyal to the students, they're loyal to the school, and they're not loyal to their own self-interest. Finally, the duty of obedience. Pretty simple. What do board members need to do? They need to obey the law. They need to obey state and federal laws, rules, regulations, and they need to obey or follow the bylaws and the contract for the charter. This is so important because board members essentially, as we said before, are held responsible by the state for the operation of the school. Well, if board members don't know the law, or they don't have a grasp of rules or anything that have to do with open enrollment charters, that's a problem, because then they may make decisions that are not informed based on the law or rule, and they may be bad decisions that gets the school into legal jeopardy. So when making decisions, board members should make the decision in the best interest of students, and they should make sure that they are aligned with the charter itself and aligned with federal, state laws, regulations, and all that. So again, duty of care. You are a good board member. You care about what you're doing. You study. You show up for meetings. You're involved in the school. The duty of loyalty. You're loyal to the school, to students, and to the mission and vision of the school. You have no self-interest, no conflicts of interest. And then finally, you're obedient. Yeah, that duty of obedience. You are following the laws, rules, and regulations of the state and the federal government. All right, so again, board members, how do I exemplify this duty of care? Are there some areas the things I can do differently that would help improve my performance in this area? What are some examples of things that a board member could do that could cause others to question their duty of loyalty? And then this is a question that boards need to ask themselves at some point. Have we examined our board policies lately to make sure they're aligned with any changes in the law? Right. And then finally, what do board members do to exemplify the duty of care? And what are some other examples that a board member could do that could cause others to question their duty of loyalty? So just some good questions to think about, and good questions that certainly board members, once they're serving, should be able to answer. One of my favorite topics is to talk about the diversity advantage when building a board. This not only is just a key part of what you do in regards to board member selection, but it's a very important part, and it's a very exciting part, because you have an opportunity to build a board that is going to be strong in so many areas. And so let's talk about what diversity looks like in regards to building a board. So first of all, there is professional diversity that certainly needs to be reflected on the board. So individual board members should really have a kind of an array of skills. They should have different personal and professional experiences that will benefit the school. So this kind of goes without saying, but certainly you want to have folks that understand finance, and they're the money people. They understand how things work with budgets. You certainly want to have folks on your board that understand public schools and education. Always nice to have someone that understands the law or a lawyer. Folks that work in service professions. That's so important, because that's just a very important role, not only in the workforce in our society, but folks that work in service professions have a unique perspective about the workforce and about jobs and about different things that you do to really get students ready if that's the pathway they choose. Real estate. gonna have to have a building, and Bika talked about that. It's always good to have folks that understand real estate and how to navigate that whole arena. Human resources, you want to have folks on your board that have some knowledge in that, because that's another important part of what you do. You have staff that you have to manage, and you want to make sure that they're managed well. Medical professions, always good to have folks that understand just basically health-related laws, rules, whether they're nurses or doctors, good to have that. And then just different industry-based professions, especially if you are a charter school that is looking at college and career. And certainly if you have secondary students, but even if you have elementary students, you're going to be looking at that. So industry-based profession knowledge is really, really important. So that's professional diversity. That kind of goes without saying. Personal and representational diversity is super important. So board members should reflect a broad spectrum of personal characteristics that really complement the diversity of the school and really reflect the students and the community they serve. So again, you know, it's simple things: diversity of gender, diversity of race, diversity of age, education and training, income, home addresses. Again, these are the things that make boards stronger. And these are things too that give your school credibility in the eyes of parents, in the eyes of the community that you're serving. You know, one of the things that I would always caution in a previous role I had where I worked with some aspiring charter applicants is I would always remind them, you know, don't helicopter into a community in regards to, you know, you're going to save that community or help that community. Instead, the selection of board members, the ideas for what the school is all about, the mission and vision should be generated naturally from the needs of the community. And things that are generated from the needs of the community are also representations of folks that live in the community. So again, folks that live in the community, that work in the community, that represent the different populations of students that you serve, that represent different income, education, training levels, those kind of things. So again, just things that pretty intuitive, I believe, when you think about that in choosing board members, but things that I think are super important and always important to mention. So again, some things to think about. Will your board membership reflect professional diversity? What are some areas of professional expertise that you would need to add to your board? And then does your board membership resemble the student population, the students you serve? How could your board be strengthened through personal or representational diversity? Right, and then just a couple other important board member characteristics. We kind of wrap this up here. So one is just the ability to communicate effectively to staff, parents, and students. So we kind of talked about that before. Not only should board members be able to communicate the mission and vision of the school and be able to talk about the performance goals of the school and how the school will know it, whether or not it's successful, but they should also be great listeners as well. And then a willingness to grow professionally and become a knowledgeable board member. Last time I checked, most folks don't get board members that are highly trained in regards to being a board member when they come into a school. You'll get board members that'll come in and the first question they'll ask is, what do I do? What's my role? What's my job description as a board member? And so again, we have training for board members and board members have training requirements, but more importantly, there has to be that desire on the part of the board member to want to grow as a board member, grow professionally, and become knowledgeable, become an experienced board member, because an experienced board member that understands essentially how to do things well, how to really promote and ensure that the mission and vision of the school and performance goals of the school are being accomplished, those folks will really help your school succeed. And finally, a desire for personal accountability. And so those are board members that are going to hold themselves accountable and responsible to make sure that the vision and mission of the school are being accomplished. All right. And then finally, I just put at the end of our deck here, as boards are selected. There are certainly resources to self-assess the strength of the board. I would encourage you actually to go into this. Again, you may not have a board member chosen yet, but you can look at these resources and really get an idea about ways that boards can assess their own strengths. Because what these different assessments will do will essentially kind of let you know how good boards and good board members function, and how board members that are not effective or non-effective boards, how they function as well. And then finally, I put a resource in here for superintendent evaluations, because again, what board members do, that's a huge part of what they do. They, to use the lingo, they hire and fire superintendents, and hopefully they're not having to fire too many, but they certainly hire them and evaluate them and hold them accountable for their performance. So just another good resource that you can look at. All right, well, with that, Natalie and John, I believe kind of wrapped up my part of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and close out my slide deck here, and happy to take some questions.
Yeah, Bruce, we had a question, but I asked that person to provide a little more clarity. So we're going to hold on a minute. So if you were the person to ask the question about rules and regulations, I guess per legal professional, I think that's how you phrased it. If you could provide a little more detail or clarity to your question, I'm sure we could get some sort of response to you. Otherwise, we don't have any other questions right now, Bruce.
Okay. One of the things that could certainly encourage you to do, if you're interested, well, what do board members need to know? What do they need to learn? So in the Texas Administrative Code, the TAC, as we call it, in Title 19, so I'll just kind of give you a big long number if you want to write it out. It's Title 19, Chapter 100, Section 1102. So 100.1102 of the Texas Administrative Code. If you look at that, that spells out the training requirements for board members. So there's 7 domains that board members are trained in, things like financial accountability, school finance, school law, health and safety, Texas Open Meetings Act, Public Information Act. So you can see the training requirements for new board members for that. And I think it'll help you understand maybe a little bit about the things that board members are responsible for. And so you might want to look that up. And then we also have some other resources on the governance page of the Texas Charter Schools website. So if you go to our charter schools homepage, and if you go to the little blue box down at the bottom that says governance, you can click on that, and there's some other great resources there as well.
And I'd just like to jump in and say there are also best practices linked and definitions and some of the resources that Bruce mentioned linked in the resource pages that are already embedded within the Generation 28 application document. If you haven't had a chance to look at those resource pages, that's exactly what we have crafted them for. We've tried to allocate, just provide a summary and overall duties and things to consider for best practice. It's really scratching the surface compared to what Bruce just shared, but it could be a good starting place, and we'll point you in the direction of other resources as well. Okay, it looks like we've got a few questions on deck here. John, do you want to facilitate that?
Yeah, so Bruce, this is a great question. How many members do most charter boards have? Well, what would you say?
Sure, great question.
We know from the app info session, it's a minimum of 3, right? So we know minimum of 3 per state law, but kind of elaborate past that.
Sure, it's a fantastic question. You'll find that the average board has generally 5 to 7 members. And a couple of caveats here. We always encourage folks to have an odd number of members. Why? Because you never want to get in a situation where you have a tie vote with a board. But I would say 5 to 7, and I would lean towards 7 as being pretty much the common number of board members in the state. Certainly you have boards that are bigger than that, and then we have some smaller boards that are just 3 members. I would really discourage you from having the minimum number, it's 3 members, because number one, it puts a lot of responsibility on each of those board members in terms of the things that they do. But also, if you have one board member that's out, then that's really a problem. If you have 2, then you don't have a quorum and all that. So I would recommend at least 5, 7. If boards also, if they get too big, then it's kind of difficult to really have great communication, and you just have a lot of challenges with lots of folks with lots of different things going on. And so I would encourage you to look at that 5 to 7 sweet spot.
So thank you, Bruce. One question we had, and I think this is what you're asking the person who wrote this, but typically who writes the job descriptions? Is that under the purview of the superintendent, or does the board typically have input into like those job descriptions and writing them?
Sure. So again, in your charter application, generally, your founding team is going to create, lots of those documents. So sometimes, founding teams will write those job descriptions. If you have perhaps a superintendent already chosen or recommended that may possibly be that superintendent when the school starts, generally those folks probably have some expertise in job descriptions. If you have somebody that has an HR background on your founding team, those would be great folks. I don't think there's necessarily a magic person to write those, but it certainly should be someone that's just familiar with what's involved in creating a job description in regards to, the overall job, some, performance goals for those different tasks that person is going to do. I think that those, someone that's familiar with those things, especially in the education arena, would be the best.
Yeah, and I think as a follow-up question, I think this person's also asking, and I'll try and hit on it, and if I miss anything, Bruce, kind of fill in the gaps on this, but I think this person's also asking who typically writes the board policies, the bylaws, more of the policy documents for the board. And I would say that 2 factors, right? Number one, this goes back to what Bruce said. It's like, who's on your board and what expertise are they bringing to this application team? If no one's equipped to write the bylaws or a lot of those policy documents, then it is certainly common for applicants to secure legal counsel or other qualified professionals to draft those documents. There's nothing in our application that would prevent that.
And yeah, I really don't have anything else to add, John. I think that's a solid response. Absolutely.
All right, thank you. And then we got one last question in 1 minute. So let's see if we can do it. This goes to board trainings, right? And I think I've asked this before. So at what point, if they do their board trainings prior to being awarded, will those trainings carry over if they're awarded, or does the board basically kind of have to like start from zero once they're awarded?
Great question. So essentially board training starts, the clock starts ticking when the contract is signed. And so any training that board members have before is great, but it really doesn't count towards the actual hours that board members need to earn, because that clock starts once the contract is signed for the charter school. And then board members have a year to complete those initial 12 hours. They have 90 days to complete 2 parts of that training, which is the Texas Open Meetings Act training and the Public Information Act training. And then we recommend essentially kind of completing the first 6 hours within the first 6 months, and then the other 6 hours at the end of the year.
Great.
Okay, we did it right on time. Yeah. Good job, Bruce.
Great.
All right, everyone. Again, thank you so much for your attendance, everyone. And thanks for the great questions and the engagement. We're doing these for you so that we can provide more resources. So if you have those questions, ask them. And please go back to the additional supports webpage and sign up for all of the forthcoming sessions as well. Just want to thank our presenters, Ambika, Donnie, and Bruce today, Bruce Marchand, for all of their wealth of information and knowledge and experience. And folks, remember, if you have other colleagues or in your network who are interested in applying for a charter in Generation 28 and have not yet attended the mandatory info session, they can attend this additional session we're holding on Friday. Okay, so just to clarify, because we had some questions, if you've already attended one of the two that were previously scheduled, you're good. You've met the requirements. But if there are just other folks in your network who are interested and haven't had a chance, then this is an opportunity for them. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you back here next week. Thanks so much.
Y'all have a good one now.